So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today to speak about all things law and legal, Scientology-wise here in the UK. Can you give me a little bit of a background as to who you are and how you fit into this whole Scientology lawsuit jigsaw puzzle in the UK?
Well, I'm a specialist media lawyer. For over 30 years now, I've done a wonderfully mixed array of work. And I've been very fortunate in that I have both been what we call a content lawyer or editorial lawyer, which means I've legaled out books, television programs, films, newsprint, magazines, whatever. And that's the context in which I've done work vis-a-vis Scientology. I've done everything from very hard-hitting documentaries, and very hard-hitting books, which obviously Scientology work is, through to crazy things like I used to legal out South Park, and I've legaled out the autobiography of Basil Brush. So it's been a wonderful mixed array of work. I'm better known, because it tends to be more high-profile work, for being a reputation management lawyer. So I've done work for high-profile companies, individuals. So perhaps, depending on, assuming this is going out reasonably soon, then most recently I've been Philip Schofield's lawyer. So the last 2 or 3 months, that's kept me very busy. But I've done work, everything from Amazon, GlaxoSmithKline, Jaguar Land Rover, through to members of the royal family, the Beckhams, Lady Gaga, that kind of work. So it's tremendously rewarding and great fun work. I'm very, very fortunate to do it. I'll add one other thing. I'm particularly pleased to do work vis-a-vis Scientology. It's a vile, horrible, dangerous cult, and it destroys the lives of people, and it is altogether a very bad thing. And it requires the work of courageous journalists and authors to expose it for what it is. Now, I'm a devout Christian, and as such, I particularly hate false religion. And so I do this work with particular passion, because I want to try and avoid people being caught up in this dreadful trap, which it is. So I've done this work always with all my might, and generally at not at full rates, because it's so important to do it. So I'm very happy to do it at generally at a pretty budget level.
I think as a former Scientologist myself, it's people like you that really make it much easier to, or not easier, but it makes it much more possible to take on Scientology where it's necessary and where it's needed. Because, I've had a lot of, for example, a couple of media interviews that I've done, one with a very large publication here, newspaper here in the UK, and it got right up to like the day before it was about to go to print. And their legal team stepped in and pulled the can and just said, no, look, we're too scared. We've had legal threats from Scientology. Karen Powell, our media representative, has messaged us and called us religious bigots. And if you publish it, we're going to sue the living daylights out of you. And they got scared and ran away. And I think, firstly, you have to understand Scientology's policy isn't to sue. It's to threaten to sue. And secondly, I just wanted to say it's people like you who have actually stood up and gone, no, I'm not scared of these guys. That means we can actually progress and take them on, because they have huge, vast amounts of money and vast amounts of resources in order to take on these legal fights. And they do scare and intimidate people. So thank you for not backing down and seeing them for who they really are.
Well, do you want me to jump in then with my first anecdote? And I mean, I absolutely take my hat off to you, Alex, because of the work that I've done, the amount that I've read and I've seen, I know what courage you have shown, because they are brutal towards apostates in a way which most people won't understand. But although I'm not an apostate, I suspect I understand to a greater degree than most. So Leah Remini, for example, I've legaled out her book. Let me then, I'm really disappointed in the newspaper, I have to say. Can we come back to that? Because I'm going to,
Certainly.
I want to hit the anecdote, and then let's not lose that point, because that is incredibly feeble by the newspaper and unnecessary because of the state of the law. But let me then let's hit with an anecdote, which you'll see why it's so appropriate.
Go for it.
So one of the things I've done is I've legaled out a very high profile documentary, which originally in
Can we
HBO.
just, sorry to interrupt, just before we carry on, by legal out, you
Yeah,
mean give the sign off for it to publish and go live and all of
Alex,
that,
you're
right?
quite right. So let me explain that, and don't let me use terminology which your folk won't recognise. So I'm grateful. So when you legal out material, you look at it from a legal perspective, and it is very important work indeed, and a lot of good and brave lawyers do it. It is essentially it's an assessment of risk, and you're looking primarily at the law of defamation and the law of privacy. Now you're also slightly looking at the law of data protection as well. But what essentially you do with any material is that you, be it print or broadcast, you're looking at uh, going through two questions. The first is there a legal and or regulatory risk here? So if it's a broadcaster, then you're looking both at the Ofcom Code, Section 7 of the Ofcom Code, which deals with fairness, and you're looking at the possibility either of a defamation or privacy claim or a possible data claim. Data claims are less frightening because they attract less damages, but nowadays you have to consider that as well. Now, if you've looked at the book, article, or program and you conclude that there aren't any substantial regulatory legal claims, then that's your job done. The more difficult part, because that's stage one, is stage two. And stage two is where you conclude that there are regulatory or legal risks. What your job then is to try and assess how likely it is that the prospective claimant is going to come after you in one way or another. And you really have to look at your prospective claimant and trying to form a value judgment about them. Now, when I've legaled out material for print or broadcast, that's very much been part of what I've done. And I've engaged in quite a lot of research to establish A, whether the church is a prospective claimant, and secondly, whether David Miscavige is a prospective claimant, and thirdly, whether in the documentary I did, whether Tom Cruise is a prospective claimant. Because in the case of the documentary which I legaled out, Going Clear, and I've thought about this, and obviously that does identify the client, but I've come to the conclusion after you've kindly given me time to think about it, that that my client in that case, which is Sky, would have no problem with me engaging in this interview. So on that basis, I'm happy to go there. But as I say, I just wanted to give that a little thought before I.
Especially as also you're not here representing Sky or talking on their behalf or anything like this. You're
And
talking about your experience, right?
it's forgive me that it's more that the work that I do for clients is confidential.
Sure.
So whether it's me or not, it's not the point. It's work that I did for Sky, and but I've decided that they will be very happy for me to do this. I think more than happy to do, which is why I've done it.
Okay.
So let's take the Going Clear documentary, and if you haven't seen it, go and find it because it is
It's a great
amazing,
documentary. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely stupendous piece of work. And I think the proudest piece of work I've ever done was that. And I was asked to do it by Sky because, well, I think for two main reasons. One is because I'm a fairly tough cookie. One legal magazine, and God forgive me if it sounds like a boast, but I think it's relevant. But one legal magazine described me as an indestructible warrior for my clients, and as a devout Christian, that's what I'm called to be sometimes. And they knew that I would be robust in my legaling of this program. And indeed, I was. And my advice was, actually, I think you can leave it just as it is. So, just to explain, the American law of defamation is completely different from the law of UK defamation. And the US defamation rules, for want of a better word, are much, much more defendant friendly than ours. So often, so when I used to legal out South Park, it would be legal for US broadcast, and they would come over to me because I'd have to re-legal it for UK broadcast, and the HBO documentary was no different. So, so my advice was, it could be transmitted just as it is. If you want to err on the side of caution, I suggest you put up one card. You know what a card is, just a, and they did put that in, but I specifically said, don't take a minute, not a second, out of this documentary. It needs to be transmitted as it is. And I'm glad to say nothing was taken out of it, and they just put that single card in. So again, picking up the your point. So for reasons I will explain, I said it's going to be my second point about the legal situation in the UK. A broadcaster and or publisher will always put on notice the subject of any program or article or book which is potentially defamatory. And I'll explain why on my next point. So a letter which I helped to draft was sent out to a firm called Carter Ruck. Carter Ruck is one of the leading reputation management firms, probably runs alongside my old firm Shillings as the sort of two market leaders in the field. I know the Carter Ruck guys well. I know Nigel Tate is the managing partner. We've had some splendid Barneys with each other, always good natured, and we've also worked alongside each other. So I know that team well. So back came an absolute tsunami of letters threatening defamation claims, privacy claims, copyright claims, and complaints to Ofcom. I received in all about 25 letters from Carter Ruck. 25.
What's the average for what would you expect if this was anything other than Scientology?
One. One of those letters enclosed an attachment to the letter, which was so vast they had to put it on a disc. Well, I can tell you that the journey time between my desk and the bin for that disc was 1 second. I didn't even put it in my laptop because I knew what was going to be in it. It was just going to be reams and reams of Scientology propaganda. I wasn't going to waste my clients' time and money by reading that. Now, I know Carter Ruck and they know me, and I know Nigel Tate. He's a very competent lawyer, very tough lawyer. But also the advantage I have, Alex, is that I've also been a claimant lawyer. And so I know the way that Nigel will think. Now, let's take the three prospective claimants one by one. Now, there is with all the overwhelming evidence about the wickedness of the Church of Scientology and the damage that it does to people's lives, there was no way that the Church of Scientology was a viable libel claimant in the UK. And I'd already done my research and I had plenty to write back about the Church of Scientology. So tick, Church of Scientology.
And by that, you mean they've already got a pretty damaged reputation. They're known as the most controversial religion in the world. It's known that they disrupt and harm families and people's lives. And because of that, it's pretty hard to defame them further. Is that what you mean by that?
That's absolutely right. And more particularly, there's plenty of evidence out there about this being so. So I flung all that back at Carter Ruck with a certain amount of glee, I confess, because
Oh, I bet.
I, 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 I do really enjoy my work. And, again, as a devout Christian, fighting evil is one of the things which I'm supposed to do. And I regarded this work, and it sounds melodramatic, but I regarded that work as fighting evil. There's, no two ways about it. That's what I was tasked to do. So then on to David Miscavige. Now, Miscavige is a very interesting character for all sorts of reasons. You'll know more about him than I do, but I feel I've got to know him a little bit. Now, one of the things which my research told me is they do not allow David Miscavige anywhere near a court. There is no way that he was ever going to be a claimant, therefore, which would have meant that he had to have to become embroiled in a legal system, which ultimately would have meant that he was going to have to give evidence in a court of law. Now, it was quite clear to me he was never going to do that. David Miscavige, tick. Tom Cruise. Now, one of the things I told you that I've done is I've legaled out a number of series of South Parks, which is more fun than any lawyer should ever have and be paid. And one of the ones I did was a one which I confess I didn't like, but I'm not an arbiter of taste. But it was a South Park episode which was devoted, as far as I can recall, pretty well entirely to a very crude allegation, well, in very crude terms, that Tom Cruise was gay. Now, the whole issue of whether accusing someone of being gay is defamatory or not is a complex one. So, in 2023, generally speaking, it is not defamatory. Obviously, there was a time when it was. And one of the things about defamation is it's constantly changing according to what society thinks is right or wrong. However, just as Jason Donovan, you may or may not remember, sued the Face magazine, this was about 25, 30 years ago, over an allegation that he was gay, the way the claim was run was not that it was defamatory to say that he was gay, but it was defamatory to suggest, in effect, that he was leading a double life, that he was pretending to be heterosexual, but in fact was gay. So I would have expected that had Cruise sued, because it was definitely defamatory of Cruise, the Scientology, so they're going clear, that was the way he would run it. But then I put myself in Nigel's shoes, and Nigel's a very smart cookie. I mean, he's not the head, he's not one of the best in the business and one of the market leaders for any other reason than he's a very good lawyer. And I asked myself, would I usher Tom Cruise into a defamation claim around the Church of Scientology? And my very firm answer to that question was no, I would not. For all sorts of reasons, I wouldn't do it. So in my mind, Tom Cruise, tick. Now, one of the things which I did is I'm pretty sure I wrote a Dear Nigel letter. And I said, look, Nigel, there's something you need to understand here. If Tom Cruise sues, my clear instructions are that we will fight it to a trial. So don't even think about issuing proceedings thinking we'll settle it, because we won't. Okay? It's going to trial. So in parenthesis, only issue these proceedings if you're prepared to stick Tom Cruise in a witness box and have him cross-examined for a day and a half by the most tough KC, as we now call them, in the country about the cult of Scientology. Well, I knew he was never going to do that. Okay, so going back to your point about threats, rather than carrying it out, my view and an opinion expressed to Sky was they're not going to do any of this. The kitchen sink and various other kitchen plumbing was flung at us. I don't see any of this generating any sort of post transmission problem. Sure enough, nothing. No
Mm.
Ofcom complaint, no litigation, nothing.
Yeah.
It was a very, I was going to say proud day. You know what I mean, Alex. I don't mean a
Yes.
proud
Yeah.
day. It was a day where I just felt I'd done something that was worthwhile, important, to help, good, punchy public interest journalism, of which we need more rather than less.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the Scientology track record, it is all about scaring and intimidating critics, former members, journalists, into silence, and trying to scare them into not proceeding or not publishing. And there have been times it has worked, because people do get scared with this multi-billion-dollar corporation threatening to sue the living daylights out of someone. That can be quite intimidating, and if you don't have infinite amount of money and resources to fight back, it's very hard, because they will drag a lawsuit out for years and years and years and years until you have no money to fight it anymore. And that is their tactic. That is what they do. What are your thoughts on that as a legal professional? Because think about it, as if you're working for them, for example, as a lawyer, that's a great source of revenue for you as a lawyer. I mean, game on. However,
Okay,
does that come into play when it comes to ethics and morality, for someone to do that, someone knowing that the litigation is being done because they want to silence or discredit someone, rather than actually a legitimate potential lawsuit?
okay, Alex, you made a lot of points there, so I'm going to try and pick them up one by
Sorry.
one.
Sure.
Forgive me. Well, I don't mean critical, but perhaps more, because I really want to do justice. I'm very, very keen to support you in this, and
Thank
I
you.
just want to do justice to them. So let's start with dragging, and I don't want to lose the point, because you mentioned that a newspaper had dropped a story. I don't want
Yes.
to
Yeah.
lose that. So can we make that next? Okay.
Sure.
So um, dragging out litigation and it caused the other side huge expense. Yes, and when so for example, if I'm acting for Amazon and I write a letter, dear sirs, I act for Amazon, I can tell you that with my defendant lawyer hat on, you got my attention immediately for that very reason. Um, there are now um, means which have been developed by the courts to make that much more difficult. There's a concept of what we call SLAPs in the UK. Now, I can never remember exactly what SLAPs stand for, but essentially what SLAPs are the very kind of litigation you describe. Strategic litigation against participation, or something it stands for, but it's exactly intended to prevent big, powerful corporations and individuals from using their financial power to prevent good quality journalism finding them out. And the judge in charge of the media and communications lift, a chap called Matthew Nicklin, who makes me feel very old, because I used to instruct Matthew when he was a junior barrister. Matthew's made it very clear in his judgments, very clear, that he is well on to this, and has. I've read a couple of judgments where he has been so vigorously defending the journalist or publisher that it's sort of a little bit edgy almost. And in a couple of cases recently, he's been overturned by the Court of Appeal, because I think he's gone too far. But we really are in an era now where such tactics are frowned upon. You talked about revenue and ethics. So I think that's the second point. Again, as a devout Christian, it's not good enough for me to know that the client will pay me and that what I'm doing is, pretty well all right. But, you can't be a devout Christian and bin your beliefs and ethics every time you go in front of your laptop. Now, obviously, there are plenty of ethical lawyers who don't share my beliefs. And thank goodness there are, because I have seen the damage that unethical lawyers can do, and it's not pretty. Now, I've pulled Nigel's leg more than once about acting for the Scientologists. I wouldn't, and not criticising Nigel, um, who, as I say, is very highly respected and is a very able lawyer and has done a lot of good work in the past. But I wouldn't act for the Church of Scientology under any circumstances. And I suspect that the Carter Ruck brand has suffered to some extent because they are a little less choosy in their claimants than some others might be. I think now the ethical question of, and I have to say, I've seen plenty of money earning unethical work done by lawyers acting for defendants as well. Don't get me wrong. Some of the work I've seen done by lawyers acting for national newspapers is disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. So it's not just on one side. But we do need lawyers to step up and play their part in combating wickedness. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. This is a wicked organization. It has done wicked, wicked things to people. It's wrecked families. It's bled people dry. It is, it deserves all the bad publicity it can get. And I would say to any lawyer who was minded to accept instructions from them, take a step back, do some reading about this organization. Is this really an organization that you want on your website or on your card, so to speak? And do you want to wake up one day and think, actually, I wish I really hadn't acted for this organization. I'm earning enough money. I really, was that a good idea? But I want to jump in and explain to you why it was really disappointing that a national newspaper chickened out, because it's an important element of law, and I think,
yeah.
and I think it's something which your viewers, it's not very widely known. So I think it's something I'll try and explain. So the law of defamation is conceptually incredibly straightforward. It is technically extraordinarily complex. And it's something which no lawyer should dabble in, because you're going to come unstuck. I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years, 32 years, whatever, and I'm an anorak. I read cases because I actually like reading cases. But unless you're up to speed with the law, you're going to advise your clients badly. So I'm going to keep this as short a law lecture as I possibly can, but it's unfortunately essential because it's directly relevant, Alex, to the story that you told about a newspaper chickening out. And that's what they did. They chickened out, and it's blinking poor stuff that they did. So the basic principle of the law of defamation until 1999 was that, absent absolutely extraordinary circumstances and very rare circumstances, if someone, be it a corporate entity or an individual, is the subject of a defamatory allegation, an allegation which lowers you in the estimation of right-thinking people, then you can go in front of a judge and seek vindication from the judge. And there's a real public interest in that for several reasons. One, because it is not good for companies or individuals or institutions like, I've done lots of work for schools, universities, church institutions. It is not good for society if organizations which are legitimate, do a good thing, are the subjects of false, damaging, defamatory allegations. Now, it's not just me who says that, but there's very clear judgment, which I often quote from the House of Lords to that effect. There's no public interest in misinformation. Very important principle. So that all changed in 1999 in a case called Reynolds v. The Times. Now, in that case, the Irish Taoiseach, who was the president, Albert Reynolds, sued the Times over allegations that he had turned a blind eye to paedophilia amongst the Roman Catholic priesthood of Ireland, a story of bottomless and catastrophic sadness and wickedness, which I say as a devout Christian. It went all the way to the House of Lords, and the House of Lords created a new defence. And however many times you read a judge saying, we don't make law, it's nonsense. Yes, they do. And no more so in my field than in that case. And what they decided in that case was to create a new defence whereby, and I'm going to simplify it as best I can, whereby if you can establish on the basis of a 10-stage test that the publication was one which was legitimately of the public interest, and you acted responsibly in publishing that story, then you will get a full defence. Now, let's just pause there a minute to try and get across how seismic this is, because seismic it really is. And I'm going to illustrate it with an actual case. So in the late 1990s, you may remember, Alex, the scandal of Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, where Iraqi prisoners of war were being kept and guarded by American guards. And appallingly, these prisoners were abused, and these guards took video footage of them abusing these people, which they then uploaded. Absolutely disgraceful and appalling way to behave. Now, this quite rightly became an international scandal, and the press covered it, and quite rightly...
It was huge, I remember, yes.
It was huge, and quite rightly heads rolled. Now, The Guardian, bless them. Now, I'm generally a fan of The Guardian. That's a brave newspaper which does a lot of work to explode. It's the only newspaper in Fleet Street which exposes wickedness in Fleet Street. So, big thumbs up to The Guardian. They do, however, have a political agenda which sometimes leads them astray. And this was one of those instances. So here goes. So I'm getting, right at the end of the 90s, they publish a story about a chap called Colonel Campbell James. And Colonel Campbell James was a very distinguished, well thought of, honour-filled British Army officer. And what they did is they published a story saying that Colonel Campbell James was at Abu Ghraib and was involved in the abuse of prisoners in Abu Ghraib. Right. Problem one, Colonel Campbell James wasn't at Abu Ghraib. Problem number two, he wasn't even in Iraq. The story was wrong. So Carter Ruck, here, thumbs up, Team Carter Ruck, acted for Campbell James, and they took on The Guardian. And The Guardian wrote back and said, well, story is a matter of public interest. We did our due diligence. Okay, we were wrong, but, we ticked the boxes that Reynolds' case put out. And that means we're not going to correct it. We're not going to pay you damages and it stays up. Right. So that is a story. A, highly defamatory of a British officer. B, means he have protective measures. C, his family have to go into hiding. D, a serious allegation against his regiment. E, a serious allegation against the British Army. And F, a serious allegation against the British state. I mean, how serious is that? And this was at a time where British Army personnel were patrolling Helmand province. So lives are at risk here. That is just how crazy the Reynolds defence is. It's barking, absolutely barking. So the effect of that is that a newspaper article or documentary can say something which is false and defamatory on a matter of public interest where the public are misled, but there is no remedy. That is a crazy state of the law. What should be the case, so I know what I'm going to say. I'm the only person who's written academic articles. I've written a book called Reputation Matters, and I'm the only person, as far as I know, who's jumped up and down and says this is a crazy piece of law. What should be the law is that the vindication element of the defamation claim should stand, but where all the due diligence is being done, what that should do is reflect in the damages and perhaps bring them down to token damage or moderate, very modest damages. That should be the state's law. And in fact, I've argued this so much, I know that there actually are one or two people who come up and said, actually, John, I think you might be right about this. Anyway, I'm nearly done, Alex, but because it's so important. Right. So in 2014, on the 1st of January, the Defamation Act 2013 came into force. And what that did is it abolished the Reynolds defence and replaced it with Section 4. The Section 4 is the publication of matter of public interest defence. And what that says is it is a full defence to any author or publisher if they prove only two things. One, that the subject matter of the publication was a matter of public interest, and two, that they reasonably believed that the publication served the public interest. Right, now finally onto your newspaper story. So, if the newspaper had summarised your interview and sent it off to Nigel at Carter Ruck or the Scientology people or whatever, and then published the summary of their response, then they would have got an absolutely bulletproof Section 4 defence. They could have applied then to deal with the extended spinning out litigation. They could have applied for a trial of preliminary issue and or summary judgment. And without anyone having to give evidence to have said, this is what we said. Sorry, yes, this is the article. We published the allegations and we included the response. And there's now loads of case law which says if that's what you do, you're going to get Section 4 defence. It's virtually automatic. And on that basis, can you strike the claim out? Now, imagine, okay, Matthew Nicklin or any other judge, he's got the Church of Scientology on one side. Well, he doesn't have the rocket scientists to work out what kind of people these are, and a respected Fleet Street title on the other. Well, which way is he going to go? For goodness sake, he's going to be. Where's my pen? I'm going to find against you the Church of Scientology. Go away and don't darken my court again ever. So it is absolutely pathetic that this newspaper didn't have the gumption. They're happy to pour crap on celebrities or Love Island people or this, that, and the other, but where they won't take on people of their own size. That is really, really poor. I'm sorry to have insisted, but that had to be stuck together to get to the point. Anyway, your question, Alex.
No, that's fantastic, and that's really well thought out and told in a way that I think anyone can understand the legal premise behind everything you just said. So thank you for that. What I wanted to ask was, do you think that So there's a two. I'll keep it to just 2 points within this question. The first one
Yeah.
is,
Two
um,
points at a time. I'm a
yes,
bear of a
no
small
more.
brain, Alex. I can only manage two at a time. Okay, so just give
So,
me two at a time.
so the first point is, do you honestly think that Scientology's reputation is that bad that it would be laughed out of court here in the
Yes.
UK?
Yeah. Yes.
And
I
secondly,
do.
yeah, well, okay, why is it that the case here and not in the US?
Well, I don't know whether they've ever sued in the US. I
Mm.
mean, in the US, the law of defamation is completely different. In the US, you have to prove A, that the allegation was false, which you don't in the UK, and B, you have to prove that it was made maliciously, which any defamation lawyer in the UK says well nigh impossible proving malice. So it's a long time since I did the research for Going Clear. I don't think, but that the Scientologists have sued for defamation, or certainly not recently. And the chances of them succeeding in a UK case is zero. I mean, they're never ever going to pull it off. And if they didn't sue on the Going Clear documentary, well, what are they going to sue on?
So this is where that brings into the second point I was going to say about the newspaper that interviewed me. Essentially, they interviewed me, wrote the story, and approached the church for comment and said, look, in order to be fair, we want to have your comment in here as well. You know, can you provide us with a comment? And they came back with this threat of lawsuits, you're religious bigots. I believe the phrase they used was, you wouldn't publish an article like this about someone who was Jewish or about the Christian church. So why would you treat Scientology any differently? And I don't necessarily believe the newspaper got scared that they would lose a potential defamation, libel, or, other sort of court case with the church. I think it was just more, these guys are known for their legal threats and their vast amounts of wealth and money, and it's just not worth the effort to get tied up in this litigation and ongoing back and forth with the church in order to publish this one article. So it's just not worth our time, our effort, or our money, irrespective of whether we believe we would actually win it or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very, very poor, Alex. I really, really do. I mean, if fighting evil, a real force for evil, which Scientology is not worth time and money, well, what the blazes are they doing publishing anything at all? And so far as the allegations of bigotry are concerned, well, yes, I mean, they're going to throw everything at you. But I'm a devout Christian. Should newspapers publish instances where a priest or a clergyman? I mean, there's a chap called Mike Pilavachi. I know he picked it up. A high-profile Anglican minister who sadly has been found to have been guilty of sexual offences against young men. Is it right that the press published that? Yes. Is it bigotry? No. Is the press just doing its job properly? Yes. So I mean, you've got to be a bit more sensible and thick-skinned if you're on Fleet Street. I mean, who cares what the Scientologists say anyway? And that, I mean, to be blunt, but is it anti-Semitic to report? Again, as a devout Christian, I have no time for anti-Semitism. Is it appropriate for a newspaper to publish activities on the part of Israel which are less than commendable? Well, of course it is. Doesn't mean they're being anti-Semitic, and it's not being anti-Christian to report wrongdoings in the church, and nor is it being Islamophobic to report if things go wrong in amongst the Muslim community. It's just not. I'm sorry, it's just nonsense. So you just got to say it's nonsense, publish the story, and show a bit of gumption. But also, the lawyers should have done as I did, and asked myself, well, how many books and articles and documentaries have there been published in the UK over the last 25 years which are critical of Scientology? I don't know, but let's say 100 roughly. How many defamation claims have they brought? Zero. I mean, your job is to assess risk. What is the likelihood of them bringing a defamation action? None.
Mm.
So it's pathetic,
Mm.
and it actually makes me angry, because you cannot allow yourself, if you're a national newspaper, to be intimidated by bad people. No, don't do it. If you haven't got the guts to do it, go and be an accountant, or raise potatoes or something else, but don't be a journalist. I mean, journalists in other countries go to jail.
Mm.
In Iran, in Russia, in a number of Muslim countries, they get shoved in jail or they get killed. And you're fussing about having to spend a bit of time seeing off Nigel and the Carter Boys. Rubbish. It's really poor.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that Scientology, it's their policy to threaten to sue, not to actually sue. It's policy to scare people and intimidate them into silence. It's not policy to actually take it to to court. Scientology have never won a jury trial, and they have been sued more than they sue themselves. Scientology are currently under fire from Leah Remini, as I'm sure you're aware, with this harassment case that's ongoing. This is the way the church operates globally. And for me, I just think, is this really an example of a real religious movement? Do you ever see the Christian church, or, a Jewish organization, or a Muslim group following the same tactics Scientology do of intimidating, scaring, and just trying to silence its critics and former members? No. So the evidence is very clearly there that it's a destructive group that aims to scare and intimidate people rather than be there for spiritual well-being and welfare at the front of their minds.
Well, I'm still working. I'm still doing work in this area with a journalist who's publishing a book. So I feel very, very strongly about it. And as I said, one of the jobs of an editorial lawyer is to assess risk. So one of the things that the lawyer should have done was look at what you've said. Have they sued? No. I feel compelled to say that one of the no, I'm not. There is. I have had to do some work vis-a-vis one other faith, which has engaged in intimidatory tactics concerning publications about them. I hope, because we abolished the blasphemy law, I hope that no Christian would ever advocate shouting, crying wolf if people speak against, I love the Lord Jesus Christ, I serve him, I'm entirely his. Am I going to sue anybody or criticize them or threaten them if they speak ill of him? No, absolutely not. He's big and strong enough to look after himself. But that we do live in something of a cancel culture, and there are issues and faiths where we've reached the point where we can't speak freely about them, and that is a very bad thing, and something which concerns me greatly. So it isn't. Scientology is unique in one sense; it's not in another. We cannot live in a world where an aura is developed or a mindset is developed where a certain section of society or organization is beyond criticism. That mustn't happen for all the reasons that we are discussing. So, Scientology must not be free of criticism.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time speaking with me today, and thank you so much for taking on this fight. You know, I said at the very beginning, it's people like you that allow that encourage us and allows us to speak out against the church, and realize that we can't do this on our own, and we kind of need people out there like you who don't have a Scientology experience per se, but have taken on the church and said, no, these guys are a destructive, harmful organization, and it requires, you know, bulldogs and people who are not afraid to take a stand, to take them on. And it's thanks to you that we can do that. So thank you for your time, and thank you for keeping up the fight, and helping us speak out.
Well, before you go, Alex, the world also needs people like you, because I have a better idea how brave you've been. And for anyone watching this, however brave you think Alex has been, I can assure you he's been braver. He's been brave enough to come out of the cult, which itself is a very brave thing to do. And that's one thing. And then he's been brave enough to speak up against it. So I am absolutely with you, Alex, and I will support people like you and Leah as much as I can because of the courage you've shown. The least I can do is to show a modicum of courage in your support. So God bless you, and I wish you well. And if you ever need my services again, you know where I am.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that.